I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar. We'll be bringing to you some information about electronic visit verification, a coordinated effort between the Missouri Health Net Division and the Division of Developmental Disabilities. I'm Heike Johns, Learning and Development Coordinator for the Division of Developmental Disabilities, and I will be your host today. So, a couple housekeeping items. If you have questions regarding any technical aspects today, we ask that you put those questions in the chat box. If you have questions regarding the content of today's information that's being presented, we ask that you put those in the Q&A box. Those questions will not be answered during today's webinar. However, there will be a follow-up FAQ document that is distributed along with the recording of this webinar and the presentation. You can watch for that package of information to come out via the division email blast, and it will also be posted on our website. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to today's presenters to introduce themselves and get started.
Hi, I'm Shelley Summers. I'm with the Federal Programs Unit here at the Division of DD.
Hi, this is Terry Woodward, and I'm the Strategic Initiatives Manager with Mo Health Net Division. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this webinar. Before we get started with our slides, I'd just kind of like to give you a brief introduction as to what electronic visit verification really is. I'm sure that you've all heard buzzing about it. I kind of like to just explain it as a way of catching in-home services up with the rest of the world. So I kind of compare it to when you go to the grocery store and you're in the checkout line. How many people in front of you are writing out a check? Not many. We are using debit cards and credit cards. When you go to the doctor's office, the doctor isn't scribbling things in a notebook and signing it with a pen. He's using an electronic way of gathering that information. That's exactly what electronic visit verification, or EVV, is for personal care services. It's just a way to eliminate the paper processes of the old world and move forward with an electronic way of documenting personal care services in the new world. So that being said, we are speaking about electronic visit verification today as a result of the 21st Century CARES Act. That is a piece of federal law that was signed by President Obama kind of on his way out the door at the end of his term. And one of the things that was required by that CARES Act is for all states in the country to implement electronic visit verification for all of their personal care services by January 1 of 2019. It also included that implementation for home health care services was required by January 1st of 2023. Shortly following that signature, many states expressed concern that they were not going to be able to achieve that by January 1st of 2019. So the federal government did grant an extension and tell states that they actually had until January 1st of 2020 to implement this electronic verification for their personal care services. So that is what we're working towards, is that January 1st, 2020 goal. You can see on your screen a list of the services that are included in our first round of electronic visit verification requirements. Basically, these are any services that include personal care that are delivered in the individual's home, including those that might be reimbursed by a managed care organization. What happens if states do not comply and if we're not using electronic visit verification by January 1st of 2020, the federal government can start withholding some of our funding. So the match that they provide us for our personal care services could be reduced or withheld. So as a result of that, we would have to start looking at reducing the amount of services available to our participants or reducing the amount that we can pay for those services. So it's really important that everybody's on board and moving towards electronic visit verification. The CARES Act was very, very specific in the information that is required to be gathered. And these requirements on this screen are for all the states in the country. They have stated that the type of service being performed must be collected, the individual who's receiving the service, the individual providing the service, the date it was provided, the location where service begins and ends, and the time the service begins and ends. The state of Missouri did add one little caveat to that. We did indicate that if you are providing a service that the authorizing agency, which that's probably going to be primarily the Division of Senior and Disability Services, they require tasks for some of their services. If you are delivering a service that requires documentation at that task level, we're going to collect that information as well. So there are lots and lots of different ways of achieving implementation of electronic visit verification. Originally, we talked a lot about telephony. Telephony is just a very basic method of gathering that information. It typically is just using the participant's landline, and you call in and say, I'm here, and then when it's time to leave, you call back and say what you've done while you were there. Telephony is still an acceptable way to meet the requirements. However, it's only if it's available consistently. So if we have people who routinely say their phone is out of service or I don't want you to use my phone, we're going to have to look at alternative methods of collecting that information from those folks. Lots of EVV vendors offer mobile applications, so they can put it on a cell phone or on a tablet. There are GPS technology options that can verify your delivery locations. Fixed devices, some companies offer a device that you actually secure in the individual's home, and those devices have a code that is constantly changing. So by documenting the code that's on that device at the time you're in the home, you're verifying when you were there. There's some that are really fancy and do biometric recognition, so they might do facial recognition or thumb printing. All of those different ways of achieving electronic visit verification are okay. Missouri is not, as a state, saying you have to use any certain form. We're just saying you have to meet all the requirements. So whichever one of these systems works the best for you as an agency is going to be acceptable. So currently in Missouri, we have many EVV vendors. We have lots of folks who are using lots of different ways of collecting the information. Because of that, we decided as a state that we wanted to allow providers to continue to select their own type of EVV system. Some of the other states in the country have been very prescriptive, and they've told all of their providers, we're going to pick an EVV company and you're going to use them. Because of the status here and because of all the different vendors already working, we opted to go ahead, let providers pick their own vendor, work with whichever EVV system meets their needs, and as a state, we are going to purchase or build an aggregator system. So what an aggregator is just, I like to describe it kind of as a funnel. It is just a system where you take all that information from all the different EVV vendors and you pour it into the top of the funnel. The aggregator system is going to take all that differing information and normalize it and make it standard so that it can provide that information back to us in a format that's consistent no matter what it looked like when the EVV system put it in there. So as a state staff, including staff from Health and Senior Services, Department of Mental Health, and MoHealthNet Division, as well as our Missouri Medicaid Audit and Compliance, will have access to dashboards that contain all of this information from the different providers. As provider agencies, you will also have access to dashboards that show you information about your participants and your caregivers. So it will be a great solution, a way for all of us to see things consistently. The intent is that, be it the state or a provider, if we need to get some information about a participant, we can actually pull up in real time and look at it and see the same thing. So right now the state is kind of in an in-between stage. We are requesting some assistance in paying for our aggregator solution. So in order to get that financial assistance, everything has to be approved by the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. Right now they do have our proposal and it is under review with them. We're really hoping that we will get a response quickly and we can get it out there and start taking some bids on that by January. Once we select our aggregator solution, we will be requiring that company to work individually with every EVV vendor who wants to do business in the state of Missouri and they will build interfaces or file exchanges with them. So that work is going to be between the aggregator vendor and the EVV vendors. They will be working together to make sure that their solutions all work. They're going to be, the aggregator vendor will be providing training and support to all of the state staff using it, all of the providers using it. Anybody who's using their system to get information will be supported and trained by them. And as I already mentioned, there will be dashboards available based on the role that you play in the personal care service delivery, so that we can get in there and get the information in a consistent manner. So right now we don't have specific technical standards for what the EVV system files are going to need to look like. And the reason for that is because we have not yet indicated who our aggregator is going to be. But we do know for certain that in order for an EVV system to be applicable in Missouri following implementation of the aggregator solution, they're going to have to be able to collect all the data elements, and those are the ones we mentioned earlier, the date, time, location. They're going to have some sort of a location technology so that we can tell where that service actually occurred. We are going to have the requirement that they are able to work in an offline mode. And what that means is that if you're using an electronic visit verification system, say you're using a mobile application on your cell phone, if you are using that in a place where there is almost never connectivity, way out in the middle of nowhere where there is just not good cell service, we're going to say if you want to use a mobile application, it has to have the ability to gather that information when it's offline. And then when you get somewhere where you get to Wi-Fi or where there's internet access, that information will be uploaded. Any manual entries that are made, be that somebody forgot to clock in or out or an adjustment needs to be made, all of those things will need to be documented in the EVV system. And the reason we ask that is because when we're reviewing the information, we want to be able to tell if we have folks who are consistently going in and manually making changes, because that might be a red flag if you're always having issues with your system. We're going to require that all of the EVV vendors are able to successfully exchange data with the aggregator. And what will happen is after the aggregator solution company tells us as a state, yes, this EVV vendor was able to interface and they are providing all the needed information, we will start to maintain a running list of those vendors who have met our needs and who we know are acceptable to deliver services in Missouri. That list will ever be growing and changing. We're always going to be welcoming new EVV vendors. It's just we're going to make sure that they meet the requirements before we actually make it official and say that they can participate here. So CMS, the federal government, realized that a lot of states were going to really be struggling to meet these goals and to achieve full EVV implementation by January of 2020. So they gave states the opportunity to request a good faith effort exemption. And basically that just means that if you are approved, if you as a state can verify that you have been working towards compliance but things have happened that have prevented it, they will give you an extra year before they start withholding money. Missouri did apply for that good faith exemption, and we were approved for it in September. However, we are still striving towards that goal of full EVV implementation by January of 2020, because utilization of EVV is really just a piece of this. Our request for the good faith exemption was to allow us some more time to develop and refine that aggregator solution. So in order for us to test it and to test the EVV vendor's ability to interface, we need to have all of our providers on board, if possible, by January of 2020 using EVV.
Okay, so we're on slide 9. EVV facts. So, as Terry mentioned, Missouri personal care providers have been using EVV for several years, and there are over 60 EVV vendors providing services in Missouri. EVV vendors are required to ensure provider staff have the training necessary to utilize the system to its fullest potential and to provide support if and whenever needed. If the participant does not have a phone, the provider will need to explore other methods for EVV, as Terry mentioned, such as a mobile application for phones or tablets. Missouri, of course, has had several natural disasters in the last few years. So in the event of a system failure or a natural disaster, manual entry will be used as a last option. Also, EVV requirements do not apply when assisting individuals with their daily needs during the delivery of waiver services. So we know this has been a topic of conversation. So for example, under the HCBS service community integration, it does include a component called personal assistance. But with the EVV requirements, community integration would not apply to the EVV. So let's talk about documentation. Waiver service documentation is a requirement, and that requirement will not change. However, keep in mind that there may be some EVV vendors that capture the necessary documentation. For DD providers, task lists or case notes are not an EVV requirement, but they are still required for the auditing purposes, but do not have to be a part of that EVV solution. So basically, you have to continue to document, but you don't have to have a system that includes that documentation. Participants still utilizing paper timesheets on January 1st, 2020 will need to think about being at risk for losing their PA waiver services until they begin using an EVV system. And of course, waiver service providers need to ensure the vendor of choice collects all required information, as Terry mentioned.
So regarding fiscal integrity, many states opted to, from the very beginning, associate their EVV systems with their billing and claim systems. In Missouri, we have made the decision that we are not going to submit claims to our MMIS system initially. Somewhere down the road, when we're fully implemented and have incorporated home health care services and we're at a more stable position with our aggregator solution, there's potential that we will interface with MMIS and those claims would go directly from the aggregator solution to MMIS. But until such time, all providers should continue to use their same billing process as they're using currently. So if you're using CMOR or to-bill or whatever mechanism you're using, that process will not change. Additionally, some states are doing some claims matching, and if your EVV data does not exactly match the claims that are being entered, they're withholding payment for that. At this point, Missouri is not going to be doing any of that claims matching or withholding payments if your claims don't match. However, if we do identify that there are agencies that consistently are submitting one piece of information in EVV and another piece of information for their claims, that certainly is going to be something that would draw attention and that we would potentially be looking at and trying to understand what's happening in that situation. I know that it's kind of challenging to wrap your mind around implementation of electronic visit verification before the aggregator solution is in place. So I just kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about what actually the plan is for January. We are going to begin the identification, and when I say we, that's primarily going to be folks from the Missouri Medicaid Audit and Compliance Units. They are going to start to look for providers who are not using EVV. Primarily those who are just totally not using it, but also those who are using it very sporadically or for a small percentage of their participants. Once those are identified, the state will work with them, talk through education pieces about EVV, what the expectations are, and those providers will be given an opportunity to move towards implementation. if we can tell that you're truly trying, that you're slowly getting there, you're making progress, you're working with EVV vendors, you're probably going to be fine. However, if during that investigation of the EVV situation, other issues arise, those issues may be addressed as well. So I'm going to tell you, the expectation wouldn't be that as a provider on January 2020, if you are not 100% compliant with EVV, somebody's going to come and close your business doors. That's not what it's going to look like. However, as a provider, if you are not compliant in January 2020, somebody might be coming to talk to you about it. And if there are other things going on that they find during that conversation, we're going to have to address those. So it's really in everybody's best interest to show that they are working towards implementation and that they're doing the best to get everybody on board. If a participant is just adamant that they're not going to use it, potentially they could lose their services. We've kind of decided throughout the state agencies, if we have participants and you have tried numerous different methods of collecting that information electronically and nothing's just working for them, but as a provider agency, you really feel like there is a legitimate reason why EVV is not appropriate for them, the state is actually going to review those on a case-by-case basis and make a determination as to whether it is appropriate for a very, very select few number of individuals to potentially not utilize EVV. Other than that, we're going to be looking at very, very high percentage rates of compliance, like in the upper 90s. We have been hosting some EVV stakeholder meetings kind of throughout this process. Some of them have been very well attended, and some of them have just kind of slid through with 2 or 3 folks. We have another one scheduled. It's on December 5th here in Jefferson City. Anybody is welcome to attend those meetings. We usually just do kind of a general update, and then we open it up for comment. So if you have thoughts or concerns you'd like to share, this is a great opportunity to do that. So I wanted to make everyone aware. On our website, there's always information about these stakeholder meetings. If something were to change, just keep an eye on the website so you could see the updated information. But there's no need to register or anything. If you want to come and talk about EVV, this is a great opportunity.
And so just to wrap up the webinar on EVV, just remember, EVV is a process more than a system, and it's changing the system to improve the process. So we have a few resources that are available. And as Terry mentioned, the websites, you can go to those to find out more information. But there's a couple that you can find on the DSS MoHealthNet website. We've got a few links there. And then we also have a couple more for additional information with DSS for the providers. And then also, if you have questions, which we've been receiving a few questions to, the ask.evv@dss.mo.gov.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. As mentioned earlier, we will be providing a recording of this webinar as well as the presentation, and there will be a follow-up FAQ document. So we'll be pushing that out via email blast, and those will be posted on websites. Thank you.